Hey, just a heads up that the following content may be disturbing or triggering for some listeners and is not appropriate for children. Please take care of yourself and others who may be listening with you. Welcome to the Bonus Babies Podcast, a show that has no easy answers, only hard questions.
That's the big thing is trying to decide which of those, where the preponderance of evidence or our gut feeling would lead us. But the other thing that I think struck me going through some of the preparatory training is that we, based on our own life experience, we tend to think what the necessary elements are for a child's physical, emotional safety, and they're not the same. They're not what you had or what I had growing up. There's a big difference between how I grew up and how my kids grew up. And we got to make sure we don't try to levy our standards or expectations on what might be a perfectly fine situation for another child.
Can you tell me what you call the kids who you've cared for over the years?
We feel that the children that we receive coming into our home are bonuses. So we call them bonus babies.
I love that. This is your host, Jayne Amelia Larson, and I'm a CASA, a court-appointed special advocate volunteer for youth in foster care. Yeah, I know, it's a mouthful. In the same way a CASA works, I explore all things in the foster care maze by talking to kids, parents, caregivers, attorneys, social workers, therapists, really anybody and everybody who will speak to me to keep the conversation open and the information flowing about all things CASA.
Hi, this is Jake Eberly, the producer of the Bonus Babies podcast, and today, Jayne Amelia speaks with Greg Rosenmerkel. He's a distinguished retired Air Force colonel and civil engineer. He's been honored with numerous awards, including the Bronze Star and Legion of Merit for his dedicated service. He now serves as a CASA in Colorado, advocating for youth who have faced neglect and abuse. Here's Rosie Rosenmerkel.
I am here with Greg Rosenmerkel. Is that right?
Yes, ma'am, you got it.
But I can call you Rosie?
You can. Most people do.
Okay, but what's amazing, the audience can't see you, but you're not the kind of person I would describe as Rosie, exactly.
Once you get to know me.
Or maybe that happens when you have a whiskey or something. I don't know.
I'm in the basement. I've been here all winter, so.
Well, what I want to say is you're bearded, number one. I don't think of anybody named Rosie who's bearded. You're kind of brawny. And if I'm not mistaken, you have many medals and awards. Again, I think of Rosie as like in the kitchen baking a pie or something. Maybe you bake too?
I can do that too. I'm a Renaissance man. More smoking than baking, but happy to help.
Okay. All right. Good. All right. So let's just talk about who you are, where you're from. What's your family of origin?
Grew up in Waukesha, Wisconsin, a suburb of Milwaukee, and mom and dad both grew up in the same hometown. I have one older sister, then me, then a younger brother, then a younger sister, all of whom live still within an hour and a half or so of where we grew up.
So you have a close family. You don't fight a lot and stuff like that, or do you when you make up?
No, I tell you, I mean, my older sister and I fought growing up, but now it's really great. In fact, both my brothers-in-law are some of my best friends. We just got back last month with a week together with all the siblings and in-laws, and everybody gets along great. So very, very fortunate in that regard.
Right. So there were no blows. There weren't any knife fights. No.
No weapons that I recall, but certainly some bruises along the way.
Bruises along the way, right? And I remember you telling me that you really learned about service from your family, from your parents, as a child, right?
Yeah, both my parents were active in the churches we grew up in. Me and my siblings, as well as my parents, were products of Catholic schools, grade school and high schools. Always served on committees and on fundraisers and things like that. So being involved in the community, both school, church, neighborhood, that was something both my parents modeled well for all of us, and most of us still do it, in some organization or another.
And you've had a pretty remarkable career. You're retired now. You seem suspiciously young to be retired, but I'm not going to get into that. Well, tell me a little bit about your life work.
Well, I always say, Jayne, it's not about age, it's about mileage. And yeah, I left home. I was one of the siblings that left home to go to school. I left at 18. I went to the Air Force Academy, which is now just about 4 hours southeast of where I live today. Did 4 years there, graduated with a degree in civil engineering, served as an Air Force civil engineer for a little over 25 years.
Wow.
This was our 13th move when we brought the family here to Glenwood Springs. And during that time, of course, some overseas, several deployments to places where I didn't bring my family, thankfully. My kids were in their 6th and 7th school, respectively, when we moved here to Glenwood Springs. I retired out of Washington, D.C. in 2013 and began a second career with the U.S. Forest Service. And I was the engineer staff officer for the White River National Forest, headquartered here in Glenwood Springs, for another 9 years. And I still work for them part-time. So I'm not really retired, but I have a lot more flexibility.
And so I'm just curious. So what kind of work would you do as an engineer for the Forestry Service?
Well,
I can't say that. How do you say it again?
the
Forestry Service?
The U.S. Forest Service.
I'm sorry, the U.S. Forest Service.
That's
okay,
right.
Good, I got it.
We are an agency under the Department of Agriculture. There's over 150 forests and grasslands across the United States, over 193 million acres of public land. Here in Colorado, over half the state is public land, either state or federal. A good chunk is U.S. Forest Service. Here in Glenwood Springs, we support 5 ranger districts that span 5 counties in Colorado and over 2.3 million acres. And me and my team on the engineering side are responsible for on the order of 2,000 miles of dirt road, a couple hundred facilities,
Wow.
everything from the outhouse you see at a trailhead to the ranger district office building you might visit to get some maps before you head into the woods. We've got an environmental engineer. We've got a fleet manager that takes care of all the Jeeps and ATVs that our folks use to manage recreation and such out in the woods. And then in the summer, I hire about a dozen equipment operators to do maintenance on those roads. So we got about 20 folks on my team. There's about 150 total working across the forest, everybody from recreation to wildlife biologists to silviculturalists to recreation specialists, folks that help with like grazing. There's hunting and fishing outfitters and guides, the wide range of multiple use management, which is what your public lands are all about.
I wondered if you ever have worked with or ever hired one of my nephews or nieces, because I have one brother with 4 kids, and they all ended up in Colorado. One moved back to the East Coast, but 3 stayed in Colorado. And they just love the life, They're like out in the wilderness. They're off the grid. They were clearing trails, doing all that kind of thing that I just frankly can't imagine. But I know that there's the whole mindset of going into the world, into the wilderness, and being one with nature, right?
Well, that's right. And there's so many people across the country that take advantage of all those things that are offered here. Again, taking their bikes out, their ATVs, walking their dog, hunting and fishing, and all those things. And it's a lot of work to deconflict all those different users. And it takes a large staff to cover, that much area and make sure that it's well cared for future generations.
Deconflict. I like that choice of terminology. Sounds like to make it all work together, right? So that there is no conflict.
Well, that's right. There's certain areas, for example, on this forest where local ranchers graze their cattle all summer. Those areas are not places where you want to have a lot of off-highway vehicle use, for example. You don't want 4x4s
Right.
tearing through those parts of the land. So, yeah, that's what we try to do, is make decisions that, as our motto says, the greatest good for the greatest number in the long run.
Very nice. The reason why I want to talk to you, as you know, is because you are about to start your CASA training. And we're going to do this podcast, I said, in probably 3 parts, or who knows with you, it might be 8 parts. Maybe you're so complicated and so rich that it's going to keep on going. We'll do it for several years. But how did you hear about CASA? I know you wandered into an office and asked, what's a CASA or something like that, right? You've heard it. How did you come upon becoming a CASA?
Yeah, it's one of those things that if you pay attention, you'll see the signs that the universe gives you, right? I was on the school advisory council for the school here in Glenwood where my kids went. One of the women I served with on that council worked for CASA of the Ninth, and that was my first exposure to it. She told me a little about it. And then a few years later, when I was on the board of directors for the Western Slope Veterans Coalition, it just so happened that we shared our building with the CASA of the Ninth. And, I walked through the door and chatted with them a little bit. And then as I was keeping up with some old friends and colleagues on social media, LinkedIn and such, and I saw CASA come up a few more times. And I stopped in one day to learn more about it. And then, as I mentioned, when it came time to embark on a new phase of life, my wife got a permanent full-time job from home, which she was unable to do, or we chose not to have her do until the kids went off to college. I had a little bit more flexibility than I had in the past, and I decided it was time to continue to serve in just a very different way. And they told me immediately they were thrilled to have not only more volunteers, but especially another man to help serve, some of the community that needs the help.
Yeah, we have so few men that you guys are super, super valuable. So what was the interview process like?
It was the CASA the Ninth director and the volunteer coordinator, and it was just like this. We met over Zoom, and we chatted, and they asked pretty similar questions, a little about my background. They delved a little bit more into my experience dealing with others in stressful situations and having gone through trauma of different kinds. And of course, I felt like I was pretty well prepared based on my experience as a commander in the military and dealing with just an infinite range of family backgrounds and experiences and conditions, the stress of deployment and being away from family, not to mention some of the physical and mental and emotional trauma that some of my folks experienced during those situations. So we talked about that a little bit, and again, I think we tried to just meet in a place where we both felt good that at least it's worth further exploration, and we'll see how training goes.
Yeah, I'm sure you know this, or perhaps you don't, but I only learned it after a little while that at least in Los Angeles, they don't take everybody. There is a pretty rigorous vetting because it's very, very valuable work, of course, but it's not for everyone, and it's not for the faint of heart. And I think I might have mentioned to you that I almost bailed a few times before even in the training, I thought, wow, I don't know if I can do this. Like, I don't know if I have the stomach for it, or I don't know if I have the courage, or I mean, I don't have the backbone for it, or all those things I think about. You probably never have because of who you are, but I really did. But then once I started the work, that all that faded away, and I just saw it as a mission.
Yeah, and conversely, like you said, not only do they vet people to the extent that some, may not move forward, but similar to you, I talked to somebody else who worked for the Forest Service, and upon retirement, she and her husband both started the training and decided, this probably is not quite right. And who knows? I'm optimistic. I think even during the interview, they asked questions about certain situations um, that put you in a place to think about how you would deal with some things that are really, really hard to deal with. So
Right,
we'll see.
right. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that also happened to me. They gave hypothetical scenarios, and how would you feel about that, or how do you think you'd respond to that? And of course, you never know until you're actually in the moment. And I know I was very careful to try to answer honestly. I had an intuitive sense of what the answer would be that they might want, but I also thought it was important to answer as truthfully as I could so that we could both figure out whether it was the right thing for me. Did that come up for you as well?
Yeah, for sure. And we did some online training in preparation for this evening's Zoom courses, and
Right, because this is your first class,
that's right.
right? And you did some online
That's
prep?
right.
Okay, great.
And some of the scenarios there, not only are they just really challenging scenarios, but it highlights how many other like extenuating circumstances, nuances, and the reason why you need to have humans doing this job. We have to trust our instincts, our knowledge of human nature and people, and try to ask those questions that maybe weren't answered, and trust our instincts when it comes to how people say things or do things they do. So that's kind of what struck me most in the preparation training is like they give you a scenario, but nowhere near enough to make an intelligent conclusion.
I know. By the way, that's gonna be true throughout all the training. You never have enough information, and I realize that probably the best attribute or skill that I brought to my CASA work is information gathering, and I didn't even know I was that good at it, but I guess that's how I actually live my life that way. I think a lot of people do, but I really like as much information as possible because I wanna have it all or as much as I can in order to figure out what to do, and you will find in the training and you will find in the CASA work, you don't have that information. You're constantly looking for it, and not only that, and I had heard this and I didn't really believe it, but people don't tell you the truth a lot. They flat out lie to you or they avoid you, they obfuscate, I remember with my kid, when I first looked at her court records, and they were 3 stacks, like 2 feet high, because 'cause she'd been in the system since she was a baby. They had everything. They had the names wrong, they had the dates
Mm.
wrong, this is like the people who were hired to write the information in the paperwork. It was all conflicting, and actually now they have a role at CASA here called Essential History, and there are some CASAs that aren't actually working with children anymore. They're just looking at the case files and trying to figure out exactly what's going on and who's who and what's what, and that's just because there's so much misinformation and there's so much missing information.
True. And what we're missing in information, though, Jane, I think that folks like us who have a little more life experience, what we have is some intuition. And not that people can't or won't try to lie to us. We have to learn to trust that. And, that's some advice I've given younger leaders in the military is you got to trust your gut on those things. You know more than you think you know. While I wouldn't say I made all great decisions, the only ones I regret are the times that I didn't trust my gut.
Really? Really? Can you give me an example of one?
Um, there's just been situations where in discussing, um, maybe it's a disciplinary case, for example, a young airman who did something wrong and his supervisor or her shop chief suggested what they thought was appropriate or what they thought would have happened, and it just didn't quite smell right. But I let them convince me to go one direction with the decision, and later found out that I should have just listened to my inner voice and trusted
Mhm,
that intuition that you have through just life experience. And I hope I can
mhm.
leverage that a little bit for some of the cases.
Right, and how did you find that out? Did it come up to bite you in the butt, so to speak, or
Not necessarily, but in a large organization like a military unit, and the units that I was entrusted with sometimes were it's hundreds of people, and as much as you try to keep things confidential, the truth is a lot of people know what's going on,
Mhm,
and you can't. There's no secrets, and there's times where a lot of people knew what the right thing was, and the truth will always come out in the end.
Hmm. So, if you were to guess right now what kind of impact you might make, or what impact you hope to make, how does that look to you?
Well, one thing that was reiterated again during the interview as well as in the preparatory training um, are the different situations, all of which are options that we consider to find out what's in the best interest of the child. And, while it was pretty clear that the desired end state is always to be with the family in a safe and stable environment, there's times where maybe that's not the best thing for the child. So that's the big thing is trying to decide which of those, where the preponderance of evidence or our gut feeling would lead us. But the other thing that I think struck me going through some of the preparatory training is that based on our own life experience, we tend to think what the necessary elements are for a child's physical, emotional safety, and they're not the same. They're not what you had or what I had growing up. There's a big difference between how I grew up and how my kids grew up, and we got to make sure we don't try to levy our standards or expectations on what might be a perfectly fine situation for another child.
Yeah, I think that's really true. I just learned about something called blind removal. I didn't even know this was a thing. It's probably going to end up being probably nationwide, perhaps, and that's where they give information about a case to 4 or 5 different people to make the decision about if the child should be removed from the home. But they remove anything about color, about neighborhood, about anything that identifies that child as being from a family of color. And then, of course, it turns out that when that is removed, more than likely that child is not removed from the home.
Hmm.
Yeah, and apparently that's a thing.
Hmm. What's that again? Say that again, the terminology?
Yeah, it's called blind removal. And it's not practiced everywhere yet, but it's something that's probably going to come, that will become more prevalent, because it makes a lot of sense. I want to think what else I want to ask you before you actually start this. Yeah, it's called blind removal, and I'm actually going to look more into it as well. I just learned about it from a guest, and it's the first time that I've ever heard of it. I think it started on the East Coast, and now they're practicing it in other states as well.
It's interesting you say that because one thing that, again, I noticed during the prep training was a discussion in one of the cases about cultural and societal norms.
Yes. Hmm.
We like to assume that societal norms mean society writ large, like all of the United States. Certainly not the case. And there are, differences between cultures in terms of living with, extended family.
Hmm.
For
Yeah.
example, our church here, St. Stephen's, large Hispanic population, and they'll have multiple generations and others living in the same household. So it's a dynamic that I would think would have to be considered.
Yeah, absolutely. And even th all of the lifestyle, how late kids stay up, or what kind of activities they do with their family, that can all very much vary depending on what family they're from. And that is something that I also had to learn for myself as well, by the way. I learned this really well in the training, and I have to think about it all the time because it's easy to revert back to what I know as opposed to what I've learned. I really have been practicing how to take an open look at the information that I am receiving, and not immediately pass judgment and say, "That's no good. That doesn't work. That's not right. That shouldn't happen." Because you know what? Maybe it's okay, and it's really me that has the problem.
Well, that's right. That's human nature, right? We try to look at everything through our experience, and that's probably the part that will be really hard to train is to, make that personal adjustment and try to separate ourselves, try to be objective to the extent we can. But again, I think it's important too that we trust our intuition um, in some of these scenarios because every source of information we're going to have will have different levels of validity and credibility, and
Yes,
you got to weigh all those.
absolutely. I'm very curious to see what happens with you being from your own very structured background. I can imagine, although maybe you don't really live your life that way, but certainly your career has been in the military, very structured, right?
Yep, for sure.
And
And my mom would tell you from the time I was a baby, I was the one that time to eat, time to sleep, time to nap, time to get up.
that's good.
So maybe that's why I went that direction. I don't know.
Maybe that's why the military suits you, right? But but I think you're going to encounter situations where that is just gonna really just disrupt completely how you think things should be. Just even in the way, people not calling you back or not answering your emails. My first social worker was fantastic, she was really collaborative, and she was happy to have a CASA on the case, blah, blah, blah. The second one didn't answer an email for, like, a year and a half. And only when I started copying her supervisor did I get some kind of response. And I had to learn how to do that. I didn't wanna do that. I was trying to make it work. I think she thought I was nuts. In fact, she pretty much said that at one point. She said, "You're, like, crazed about this." But no, I was just in my mind, I was doing my job.
Well, it's the same thing, right? We try to judge others based on how we would treat others. And if I tell somebody I'm gonna call at 2 o'clock or I'll be there at noon, I expect others give it the same weight that I would.
Yeah, it's not gonna
And
happen, Rosie.
I know. And in my case too, not only military, but I was a military engineer, which
Yeah,
there's
like
there's
double
memes out
whammy,
there
right?
about us. Yeah. There's not always a black and white answer.
Right, but now you didn't really answer my question. So
Oh, sorry.
in your dream of dreams, what do you hope to achieve? I
Gosh,
mean, this might be too hard to answer, maybe too personal, but I'd like you I mean, even if it sounds silly, please tell me.
no, not at all. And as much as, the military is about big units and big missions, those things that I remember the most and those situations that maybe I'll share speaking with a group is just those one-on-one situations where, one of the airmen that was in my squadron or one of the younger officers that I helped mentor along the way, when you hear back from them that you made a difference. And a few are coming to mind. So I get emotional about some of them. But those one or two times when you get that kind of feedback is just so much more rewarding than any of the promotions, any of the medals or recognition. The hope is that engaging a child much younger than those with whom I had the pleasure to work before, helping a young person get back on track and give them at least some options going forward, that's my dream.
That's a good dream, Rosie. It really is. Okay. I can't wait to talk to you again once you've been in the training and it's started, once it really sits in you. And we'll do that in a couple weeks, I think, right?
Yeah, looking forward to it. Like I said, training starts here in about an hour, so timing was perfect. And I'll stand by to touch base with you again and fill you in on how it's going.
Thanks, Rosie, for coming and taking the time to speak with us. And the next episode is the second half of your journey after becoming a CASA. And based upon this last interview, I just wanted to say how fortunate it was that the CASA office was next to your office and you were curious enough to walk into the room and learn more about it. And I think if people were equally curious and just took a moment to walk in and ask a question, there might be more people offering their services as a CASA. Anyway, thanks so much, and we'll see you on the next episode. Thank you, everybody, for listening, and be well. If you or someone you know is harming themselves or thinking about harming themselves, go to crisistextline.org. If you see something, say something. If you suspect a child's health or safety is jeopardized in any way by parents or anyone else, Contact the Child Protective Services Agency in your county. 24-hour hotlines are staffed by trained social workers who will help you through the process, and you can do so anonymously. In California, you can call the Child Protection Hotline at 800-540-4000. So if you see something, say something. You might be saving a child's life. If you want to know more about becoming a CASA anywhere in the country, go to nationalcasagal.org. And in LA, casala.org. And if you want to know more about becoming a foster parent, check out the National Foster Parent Association at nfponline.org. There's also faithfosterfamilies.org and adoptuskids.org. There's tons of other information online as well, so you can just hunt around. We also want to thank the supremely talented Christina Apostolopoulos for her beautiful original music. You can find her music on Spotify or Instagram at Christina Aposta. And also thank you to Yukon Har for his engineering. Thanks for listening, and if you like what you hear and you find it as valuable as we do, please rate us and hit subscribe. You can also make a donation at bonusbabies.org. See you next time.